Welcome to Almost Interesting, a quiet place for curious minds and calm stories to help you rest. Take a deep breath, settle in, and let your imagination drift into tonight's tale. This story is just for you. Let's begin. The winter was cruel that year. Snow covered the cobbled streets of Ravenhold like a burial shroud. Chimneys smoked lazily in the icy wind, and the town was quiet in the way only fear can make it. People locked their doors early and kept their shutters closed, not for fear of wolves, but for something far worse. A man who walked like a shadow, killed like a ghost, and left no trace but a whisper. They called him the Rat Eyes. No one knew his real name. No one dared ask. It was said he had once been a peasant boy, orphaned by war and raised by crows, with eyes too sharp and cold for any child. Some claimed he'd been trained by the Black Knives of the East. Others whispered he was cursed, a revenant with a blood debt to pay. But the truth, as always, was more cruel than the legend. His name, once, had been Elric. He was born in a rotting village forgotten by maps, on the edge of Lord Thane's sprawling domain. His mother died in childbirth, and his father, already a drunkard by trade, died not long after to a gambling debt and a slashed throat in a dung-strewn alley. No one cared. No one remembered. Only Elric remained, thin as bone and twice as sharp, surviving on stolen crusts and rat meat. By the time he was 10, he had killed his first man. It was not noble. It was not clean. A traveling mercenary had cornered him in the stables, drunk, laughing, with belt undone, and violence in his eyes. Elric bit his hand, gouged out one eye with a splintered pitchfork, and slit his throat with a shard of broken pottery. He ran before anyone could ask questions. No one ever looked for the mercenary. In Ravenhold, dead men were a part of life, but someone had been watching. His name was Master Olgrim, a man without age or mercy. He found Elric crouched near the river the next night, shivering and blood-soaked, eating raw fish. He did not speak for a long time. Then he simply said, "You want to keep living? Come with me." Elric went. The next 10 years were a blur of pain, silence, and shadows. The Brotherhood of the Dagger taught no compassion. Compassion made your hand tremble. Compassion got you killed. Elric learned the blade, the poison, the garrote. He learned silence as a second language. He learned how to make death look like an accident, how to kill a man in his dreams and never be seen. They broke his bones to teach him how not to fear pain. They buried him alive to teach him patience. They sent him into enemy strongholds with nothing but a rope and a name. He returned with bloodied hands and no hesitation. And in all those years, he never once cried. By 20, Elric was the Brotherhood's most prized tool. He had killed lords, bishops, lovers, and beggars. He had ended a king's bastard son during a masquerade, making it look like a lover's quarrel. He poisoned a caravan of rebels with honeyed wine. He slit the throat of a sleeping monk whose sermons had grown too revolutionary. But Elric did not dream of gold, or women, or glory. He dreamed of nothing. He slept lightly, like a wolf. He never stayed in one place. He never removed the black scarf from around his neck, the mark of the Brotherhood. Yet somewhere, in the frost-bitten ruin of his soul, something stirred. One night, in the city of Malmere, he was given a name, Lady Isara de Velin. She was a noblewoman, famous for her charity and stubborn defiance of Lord Harridan, the man who now paid Elric's fee. She had built orphanages, sheltered fugitives, She had sent letters to the crown calling Harridan a tyrant. Her death was to be a warning, a public message. It had to be bloody. Elric watched her from the rooftop for 3 nights. She was young, barely older than him, with a quiet resolve in her eyes. He followed her to the market, to the poorhouse, to the chapel where she knelt not as a lady, but as a servant. She did not carry a dagger. She did not fear the dark, and for the first time in years, Elric hesitated. He stood in her chamber that final night, blade in hand, breath silent. She lay asleep, golden hair fanned across the pillow, a book clutched in one hand. Elric raised the knife and stopped. Something inside him cracked. He left without a sound. The Brotherhood does not forgive failure. The price of mercy is death. By dawn, the contract was null, but the death mark was not. Elric now bore a black star on his name, a traitor's mark. The other assassins would hunt him, not out of hate, but out of duty. There was no brotherhood without obedience. Elric fled into the wilds, chased by ghosts he once called brothers, hunted by the very system that had made him. Now he walks alone, no longer an assassin, not yet a man, not any more Elric, not yet someone else. And the world he thought he understood begins to show new faces, sorcerers hiding among kings, a brewing rebellion in the east, and whispers of a power locked in the ruins of an ancient castle where no man dares tread. But before he can run from his past, he must decide, was he only ever a weapon, or something more? The forest was an old one. Trees stretched toward the sky like blackened fingers clawing at heaven, their twisted roots drinking deep from the bones of the forgotten dead. Somewhere beneath the canopy, the wind whispered names Elric had tried to forget. He moved through it like smoke, feet barely touching the snow-packed ground. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His ribs showed. His boots were split at the toes, but he did not stop. He couldn't. The Brotherhood would already be tracking him. And worse, they would send Thorn. Thorn was not the best assassin. He was simply the most patient. Where others chased their prey like wolves, Thorn waited like frostbite. You didn't know you'd been touched until it was too late. Elric had trained beside him as a boy. They had once shared a room with straw beds and cold stone floors. Thorn had saved his life during a mission gone wrong in Orland Court. But that was then. Now, Thorn would kill him without hesitation. And if Thorn was sent, it meant only one thing. The Brotherhood wanted to make an example of him. Elric reached the edge of the forest by nightfall and saw the lights of a small village glimmering in the valley, like scattered fireflies. He had no intention of speaking to anyone. A voice too often used became easier to recognize. But he needed food, warmth, shelter, if only for a few hours. He waited until most lanterns were out, then descended quietly, slipping between fences and under windows like a cold thought. He found a barn, half collapsed, stinking of mold and hay, and crept inside. He buried himself in the straw, pulled his cloak tight, and closed his eyes. He dreamed of fire. He awoke to steel at his throat. "You breathe loud, stranger," a girl's voice said. He didn't move. The blade pressed harder. Then he saw her, not more than 17, with hair like tangled wire, and eyes too sharp for someone so young. She held the dagger backward, as if she didn't quite know how to use it, but was still willing to try. "Name," she demanded. "Lorik," he lied. It was a name he hadn't used in years. "Why are you in my barn, Lorik?" "I was cold. I didn't touch anything. Could have been a thief." Could have been, he agreed. She studied him, blade still touching skin. You don't smell like a thief. And you don't fight like a farmer's daughter. She lowered the dagger, just a little. Her name was Mira. She had 3 goats, a blind grandfather, and a hatred for the local baron who taxed them into starvation. She brought Elric bread and turnips. He ate in silence. She didn't ask more questions. Later, as they sat by a dying candle, she said quietly, "You're running from something." He said nothing. Mira looked at him. If you were a good man, you wouldn't be afraid. If you were a bad one, you'd be armed. But you have the eyes of someone who's tired of both. He turned away. You're too smart for this place. She smirked. That's what my father said, right before the Baron hanged him for insubordination. The silence returned. By morning, he was gone. He left behind a piece of silver and a word carved into the wooden post near the barn door. Live. 2 days later, Thorn reached the same village. He didn't ask for Elric. He didn't need to. He moved through town like a ghost in daylight, speaking only to goats and children and shadows. He stood in Mira's barn that night, his breath steaming in the cold. He found the silver coin. He found the carved word. And for a moment, just a moment, he frowned. Then he walked into the dark again. Elric moved west, toward the coast. Rumors traveled faster than horses, and he had heard whispers of an island where the Brotherhood's reach thinned like mist. The Isle of Vir, storm-wrapped and forsaken, might give him time. Time to think. Time to disappear. But the journey was perilous. The roads were snowed over. The inns watched, and bounty hunters had begun hearing his name. Rat Eyes, the traitor of the dagger. A price now dangled over his head like a noose. They wanted him alive. The Brotherhood wanted his death to be slow. He needed allies, or ghosts, whichever came first. In the port city of Dunhollow, he found both. The air there stank of brine and rot. Ships moored like carcasses in a tide-choked harbor. The taverns reeked of old beer and desperation. He found work as a dockhand under a false name, keeping his head down. But trouble, like blood, had a scent. And soon, it found him. A gang of local cutthroats had taken to extorting the dock crews. One of them, a brute with a cleaver and a missing nose, put his hand on Elric's shoulder and told him he owed protection coin. Elric gave him a lesson instead. When the brute hit the ground gurgling, 2 others came at him. He broke one's jaw with a barrel hook and snapped the other's wrist. The dock went silent. No one cheered, but no one stopped him either. He vanished again before nightfall, but one pair of eyes had followed him. A woman dressed in a sailor's coat, with an old sword on her hip and a spyglass tucked into her belt. Her name was Sarah Vance, and she was not what she seemed. That night, as Elric sat alone by the harbor, watching the ice break on the water, she sat beside him, uninvited. "You fight like someone with a debt," she said. He didn't look at her. "Lucky for you," she continued. "I deal in debts. And what do you want in return?" "A name. I think yours isn't the one you gave the harbor master." "Then why talk to me?" "Because I've seen men run. You're not running. You're trying to decide if you should turn around." He looked at her for the first time, and for the first time in months, he asked a question instead of answering one. "What do you want from me?" She smiled. "A ship, a crew, and someone who knows how to kill without flinching." The sea was black that night. Waves slapped against the harbor stones like angry fists. A storm brewed far off on the horizon, and gulls screamed warnings no one listened to. Elric stood near the edge of the dock, staring into the water, his reflection barely visible beneath the shifting current. He'd seen too many faces in that current. Some dead, some forgotten, some still chasing him. Sarah Vance waited behind him, her arms crossed, coat flapping in the wind. "I've got a ship," she said. Elric didn't turn. "Then take it. I need a crew. I'm not a sailor." "No," she said, "you're something worse. That's why I need you." He turned now, slowly, eyes like chips of flint. "Say what you want to say." Sarah didn't flinch. "You've got ghosts all over you. You move like someone who's been hunted, or someone who used to do the hunting. And that interests you. It scares me, but I've got a job that scares most people. I need someone without fear." Elric watched her a long moment. "Fear's never the problem. It's what comes after that's hard." By morning, he was aboard the Wailing Star, a creaking, patched-up sloop with one working cannon and sails that had seen better decades. The crew was smaller than Sarah had implied. 5 men, 1 girl barely 15, and a mute cook with burn scars down half his face. "Elric," she introduced him. "He'll keep us alive, or get us all killed." No one asked questions. Sea folk rarely did. They measured worth in silence and scars. Their destination was an island called Viramore, an ancient place said to be cursed, half swallowed by jungle and ruin. Sarah claimed there was something hidden there, something old, something valuable. She never said what. Elric didn't care. He needed to vanish, and the sea was as good a grave as any. Days blurred. Sarah proved more capable than she looked. She navigated by star and instinct, never once needing a map. She trusted no one, drank too much, and carried an old silver dagger she claimed had once belonged to a drowned prince. Elric mostly kept to himself. He took night watch, slept little, cleaned weapons that hadn't seen blood in weeks, but even at sea, the past reached for him. He began seeing the boy again, the version of himself with rat eyes and muddy feet, watching him from shadows, mocking, asking questions he didn't want to answer. Sometimes, in the dark, he whispered names to himself, names he'd been paid to forget. But one name wouldn't leave, Isara. He still didn't know why he spared her. Weakness? Guilt? A buried scrap of humanity? It didn't matter. That choice had signed his death sentence. The Brotherhood didn't forget. On the 4th night, Elric woke to silence. Too much silence. No creak of sails. No snore of crew. Just wind, and something beneath it. A sound like scraping wood. He grabbed his blade and climbed up, barefoot and silent. The deck was empty. No lanterns burned. Then he saw the cook, slumped against the mast, throat opened cleanly, eyes wide. A shape moved near the helm. Elric ducked instinctively as a dagger whipped past his head. "You've gotten slower," said a voice. He knew it instantly. Thorn. The man stepped into the moonlight, taller now, older, but same cold precision in his movement. His dagger gleamed like a smile. "No mask?" Elric asked, circling slowly. "You're not worth the ritual," Thorn replied. "I see Brotherhood manners haven't improved." "They improved. You just stopped being part of them." They moved like dancers, a slow, inevitable arc toward blood. "You could let me go," Elric said. Thorn tilted his head. "You could have killed her." Elric froze. Thorn's smile faded. "You think this is about orders? About failure? It's about choice, Elric. You made a choice. We don't get to do that." Steel rang in the dark. They fought across the slick deck, blades whispering against the sea air. Elric was faster. But Thorn was relentless, always a breath ahead, always reading. He cut Elric once, deep along the ribs. Elric drove his knee into Thorn's gut, cracked a rib. They broke apart, panting. "You were always better with words," Thorn said. "But I learned one thing better than you." "What's that?" "How to finish the job." He lunged, but slipped. Elric feinted, grabbed the mast rope, and whipped it across Thorn's eyes. A flash, a scream. Steel fell to wood. Elric didn't kill him. He just kicked him overboard. The splash echoed like a bell tolling. By sunrise, the crew was quiet. They buried the cook at sea. Sarah said nothing, just handed Elric a rag for his wound. "He was one of them?" she asked at last. "Yes." "Will more come?" "Yes." She didn't flinch. "Then let's find what we're looking for before they do." Elric sat alone at the bow that night, watching the stars fade into mist. He had crossed a line. The sea had no roads, only circles. And his was beginning again. Firemore rose from the sea like a wound. Jagged cliffs tore through the fog, slick with moss and salt. Vultures circled above, their cries swallowed by the wind. The jungle beyond the shore looked ancient, trees thick and knotted, roots rising like ribs from the ground. Nothing about the place felt right. Even the sea seemed eager to leave it behind. Elric stepped off the ship without a word. His wound still burned, though he wrapped it tightly beneath his shirt. Sira followed him, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Welcome to the edge of the map," she muttered. The others, her small crew, set up camp by the tree line, wary eyes scanning the thick green ahead. The girl, Laura, held her dagger tight against her thigh. Elric noticed the tremble in her hands. "This island," he said to Sarah. "You've been here before. Once. Long ago. And what are we looking for?" Sarah didn't answer at first. She stared into the jungle, like it might stare back. A ruin, buried in the heart, older than the Empire. My brother found it once, years ago. Said there were carvings, names, weapons not made by any kingdom. And you want to find it? I need to. The Brotherhood isn't the only thing that hunts people like us. And maybe, just maybe, what's buried in that ruin might be enough to scare them. Elric raised an eyebrow. "You're chasing myths." She looked at him. "You're one." The jungle swallowed them by midday. It was slow going. Vines choked the path, and biting insects feasted on every inch of exposed skin. Once, they found the bones of something huge. Beast or man. No one could tell. Trees leaned too close, their leaves whispering things no wind should carry. Elric kept to the rear, watching the path behind them as much as the one ahead. He didn't trust the island. He didn't trust the silence. That night, as they sat around a struggling fire, he cleaned his blade and listened. The others whispered of curses, of shadows that moved without sound. One sailor claimed he saw a pale figure between the trees, tall and thin, with eyes like fireflies. Elric didn't laugh. He'd seen worse things than ghosts. Sarah unrolled a weather-worn map, drawn by her brother's hand. She traced a line inland with her finger. "We reach the ruin by the third day," she said. "And then, we find what's waiting." Elric didn't say it aloud, but he knew the truth. Something would be waiting. The next morning, they lost the first man. Jakel, a deckhand with a bad knee, went to relieve himself behind a stone outcropping. He never returned. They found no blood, no tracks, only a single boot resting upright in the mud. Laura refused to move forward. Her voice shook. She clutched a wooden charm to her chest, some peasant god of forests and safe passage. Sarah tried to convince her. Failed. Elric didn't speak. He just stood and waited. Either the girl would walk, or she wouldn't. In the end, she walked. People always did when fear was behind them, not in front. By nightfall, it began to rain. The jungle turned slick and choking. They moved slower, hungrier, paranoid. Then they found the first stones, half buried in vines, worn down by centuries, broken pillars carved with spirals and open mouths. Sarah knelt beside one and touched it like a grave marker. "This is it," she whispered. Elric felt something then. Not magic, not dread, just awareness, like the trees were listening. They made camp near the ruin's edge. Sarah wanted to wait until dawn to explore deeper. Elric agreed. That night, he woke suddenly. Not from a noise, from the absence of noise. The jungle had gone silent. He rose, dagger in hand, walked toward the edge of camp, and found Laura. She was standing with her back to him, rigid, her hands limp at her sides. Elric stepped closer. "Laura," he said. She turned. Her eyes were pitch black. Then she smiled. Not her smile. Something else's. "Elric," she said, voice stretched, unnatural. "They remember you." He lunged, too slow. She vanished in a blink, like mist scattered in wind. He told the others nothing. They wouldn't believe him. Or worse, they would. He sat beside the fire and stared into the flames until dawn, and as the sun rose over Veermoor, he realized something chilling. This island didn't want to be found. It had teeth, and it had started biting. They entered the ruin at first light. The stone path was slick with moss, and older than the Empire itself. Trees leaned away from it, as if nature refused to touch what man had once built, and then forgotten. Carvings lined the stones, twisting serpents, inverted suns, and figures with no faces. The jungle had not swallowed this place. It had grown around it, afraid to intrude. Sarah led, torch in hand, her breath fogging in the cool of the stone corridor. Elric followed, blade drawn, senses on fire. The others came behind, quieter than before. No one joked. No one spoke of pay or glory anymore, only survival. They passed through a wide arch, the air shifting as they did. Colder, still, as though stepping not just into shadow but into memory. Laura paused, staring at a carving near the wall. A tall figure, arms outstretched, flanked by crawling, broken bodies. "What is that?" she asked. Sarah didn't answer. Elric did. A warning. The deeper they went, the less the ruin resembled anything human. Corridors bent at strange angles. Rooms opened into hollow pits. They found bones, but not just human. Something larger. Rib cages the size of carts. Skull fragments with too many eye sockets. The group rested in a chamber with walls carved to resemble mouths. All open, all screaming. Sarah studied them with professional fascination. Elric just stood near the exit, listening. There were no sounds, not even the jungle. That's when he knew. They weren't alone. It started with the torchlight. The flames began to flicker, not from wind, but from some unseen shift. The air grew heavier. Laura cried out suddenly, pointing at the wall. Her shadow wasn't hers. It stretched across the stone, taller, limbs too long, head tilted sideways. Then it moved, independent of her. She screamed. One sailor rushed to her, dagger drawn. He barely made it 2 steps before his feet left the ground. His body lifted, limbs stiff as boards, twitching in place. Eyes rolled white, mouth wide in silent terror. Then, with a crack like dry wood, he snapped in half. Panic erupted. The crew scattered, torches falling. Elric grabbed Laura and Sarah and ran, dragging them down a corridor blindly. Behind them, footsteps echoed, light, like something walking barefoot through ash. They turned corners, stumbled downstairs, slammed into walls they didn't see coming. Finally, Elric shoved them through a half-collapsed archway and pulled a slab of stone down behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only their ragged breathing remained. Sarah lit a small oil lamp. Her hands shook. "What was that?" she whispered. Laura sobbed silently, rocking. Elric didn't answer at first. Then, "I've seen them before." Sarah's eyes shot to him. "You knew?" "Number I've seen shadows that walk. In the north. After a massacre. They fed on memory. They spoke in voices you thought you'd forgotten." Sarah's face hardened. "Are we in a tomb?" Elric shook his head. "A cage." They waited for hours, resting against the stone, listening for the footsteps that never came. Eventually, Elric stood. "We keep moving." "Where?" Sarah asked. "To the center," he said. "This thing, whatever it is, it's guarding something." Sarah frowned. "And your plan is to walk into it?" "My plan is to end it." They moved more carefully now, cutting through side halls and broken paths. Sarah marked each wall they passed to avoid walking in circles. The ruin seemed to breathe, its walls pulsing faintly in their peripheral vision, like the stone was alive with memory. At one point, they came across another body, one of the missing crew. Only, it wasn't fresh. It had decayed to bone and dust, clothes rotted completely, and carved into the stone beneath it were the words, "He fed them." Laura threw up. Sarah looked away. Elric just stared at the writing. He'd seen that hand before. Hours passed. Days, maybe. Time twisted in the dark. Finally, they found the chamber. Massive, circular. A dome held up by pillars shaped like grasping arms. At its center stood a stone altar, and on it, a blade, black as midnight, slick with shadow. It pulsed faintly, as though drawing breath. Elric stepped closer, and the voice returned, not aloud, inside. "We remember you, Elric of the Hollow Path. We remember your sins." He dropped to his knees, head spinning. Visions assaulted him. Faces of the dead, mouths open in silent accusations. Each life he'd taken burned across his memory like brands. The blade whispered, "Take me, feed me. You will never be hunted again." Sarah's voice snapped him back. "Elric?" She pulled him up. The blade pulsed again. A crack echoed through the ruin. Something was coming. He turned to her. "Don't touch the sword." "Why not?" "Because it wants to be used." They didn't speak for a long time. The black blade lay on the altar, whispering in the quiet, pulsing like a heart. Elric refused to look at it again. The moment his eyes touched that metal, the voices returned. The cold flood of memory, the hunger. Sarah circled the altar, fingers twitching near her dagger, eyes wary. Laura stood behind them, arms wrapped tightly around herself, gaze fixed on the stone floor. The chamber began to tremble. "Whatever you woke," Sarah said. "It's coming," Elric nodded. "It knows we're here." "Then what now? We run?" Elric turned his head slightly, listening. No footsteps, no whisper, just pressure, like something massive leaning against the walls of the world. "We can't outrun it," he said. "But maybe we can trap it." Sarah arched a brow. "Trap a thing that eats souls?" He looked at the altar, at the blade. "No," he said. "Not it. Me." The plan was madness, but they had no better option. The ruin wasn't just a tomb. It was a seal. A cage for something ancient. Something born before language. The black blade was the lock, or the key. "Something happened here centuries ago," Elric said. "They built this place to bind it. They fed it blood, memory, pain." "And now?" Sarah asked. Elric looked down at his hands. "Now it's hungry again." They moved fast, retracing their path through the ruin. Carvings seemed to shift in the corner of their eyes. Once, Laura swore she saw her mother's face in the stone, weeping silently. Another time, Elric saw a child, his brother, standing in a hallway that wasn't there a moment earlier. They ignored the illusions. They had no time for ghosts. At the Chamber of Mouths, they stopped. Sarah unrolled the last of her maps, drawn hastily from memory, and fragments of her brother's notes. "There's a passage under the altar," she said. "If we open it, maybe we can trap it below again. Seal it in. And if we can't?" Elric asked. She didn't answer. Returning to the altar room was worse. The air had changed. Thicker. Heavier. The shadows moved even when the torches didn't. The sword was still there, but the altar had cracked. Something beneath the stone pulsed with slow, wet rhythm. Elric stepped forward, alone. Laura tried to follow. He held up a hand. "Stay." He approached the altar, laid both palms against the stone, whispered, "Let me speak to it." The air dropped to freezing. Darkness poured up from beneath the altar like smoke. "You seek to bargain." Elric's voice was steady. "I seek an end. You carry death. Old death. Sweet. Painful. So many screams. I offer them," he said. "And more. My memory. My name. Names are power. Then take mine. And in return..." He closed his eyes. "Let the others go." The chamber cracked. Stone split. The blade leapt into the air, hovered, then slammed into the altar. Blood poured from it, though it had touched no flesh. Sarah pulled Laura back as the ruin shook around them. "Elric," she called. But he was already changing. Darkness wrapped around him like a cloak, entering through his eyes, mouth, scars, his veins lit with red fire. He didn't scream, but his body shook like it wanted to fall apart. Then silence. The blade dropped to the ground. Elric stood, breathing hard. His eyes were no longer his own. "I've bought time," he said. Sarah stepped closer, cautiously. "What did you do?" Elric looked at her. "I made a pact. I'll carry it now. It's hunger. It's memory. You can't hold that forever." "I don't have to. Just long enough to bury it again." Together, they found the passage beneath the altar. It led deep, deeper than the ruin should allow. At its base, they found a pool of black water and the remains of those who'd made this pact before. Priests, warriors, martyrs. Elric stood at the edge. "This is where I stay." Sarah reached for him. "Don't." He smiled faintly. "You'll find your brother's map leads beyond this island. Whatever he wanted to stop. It wasn't just here." Sarah nodded, lips tight. Then Elric turned and stepped into the black water. It embraced him like a lover, and the stone door closed behind him. Sarah and Laura emerged from the jungle 2 days later. Their ship was gone, burned, but the sea was calm, and the island was quiet. They buried the dead with no prayers. The jungle had taken too many, and Sarah no longer believed in the gods of her childhood. She and Laura burned what was left of the camp. Food, supplies, maps too soaked to save. The ship was gone, its hull a scorched carcass drifting just offshore, sails torn like wings plucked from a bird. No one had survived. No one but them. Sarah sat beside the fire they built on the beach, sharpening her dagger slowly, eyes locked on the sea. The wind had changed, quieter now. The dread that clung to the air in Viramore had faded, like the island had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. "Elric stayed behind," Laura said softly. Sarah didn't reply. "He saved us." Still silence. Then, "He made a choice," Sarah finally said. "Now we make ours." It took them 3 days to repair the skiff that had survived in pieces near the rocks. Sails stitched from canvas bags, rope pulled from corpses, a crude mast raised from a stripped tree. It was enough to drift, enough to flee. But they didn't sail home. Sarah set the bow northeast, toward the Empire, toward the place her brother had marked on the very edge of his last map, a place called Marrowfield. A dead city, some said. Others said it was never alive. Either way, it was the next piece. On the fourth night at sea, Sarah dreamed. She stood in a field of bone. A black sky swirled above her, and the stars looked down like eyes. In the distance, a figure stood, tall, cloaked, unmoving. She walked toward it, though her feet sank into ash with each step. "Elric?" she called. The figure turned. Its face was hers, and it smiled with teeth that weren't human. She woke with a gasp. The sea was calm, but something was wrong. Laura was standing at the edge of the skiff, back stiff, looking into the dark water. "Laura?" Sarah stood slowly. "What are you doing?" "She's calling," Laura whispered. Sarah moved toward her carefully. "Who?" Laura didn't answer. Her foot lifted. She stepped off the skiff. Sarah lunged, grabbed her by the wrist, dragged her back, screaming. Laura thrashed like something was inside her, like her mind was unraveling. Then she went limp and whispered, "He's not alone down there." They reached the mainland 2 days later. The Empire's coast was a shadow of itself. Villages burned, roads choked with refugees, plague carts rolling quietly under banners of white. No one welcomed them. No one noticed. They walked inland on foot, silent and dirty. News passed between mouths in fearful murmurs. Assassins returning from the dead. Warlords naming themselves kings. Cities falling in one night, to enemies no one could describe. And always, whispers of a darkness spreading east. At a tavern near the edge of the great marshes, Sarah bartered for horses. The innkeeper stared at her like he recognized something, but said nothing. Laura sat by the fire, pale and quiet, fingers twitching in her lap. Sarah placed a single gold coin on the table. "Have you heard of Marrowfield?" The innkeeper's smile vanished. He leaned forward. "Forget that name," he said. "Forget your gods. Forget your mission. If you value your soul, girl, ride the other way." Sarah didn't blink. "Then I'm headed the right way." That night, as they camped in the woods, Laura spoke again. "He's still alive," she said. Sarah didn't answer. "I can feel him. He's dreaming of us, of the ruin, of the blade." A chill passed through the firelight. "What else?" Sarah asked softly. Laura's voice changed, deeper, slower. "He's holding something back, something older than names." Then she blinked. Her face returned. "I'm tired." Sarah sat up for hours after Laura slept, eyes fixed on the trees, hand resting on the hilt of her blade. The wind whispered again. Not leaves, not language, just presence. She stared into the dark and thought of Elric, of how a man who'd killed hundreds had sacrificed himself so others could live, and how the thing he'd imprisoned wasn't dead, only waiting. And it would not wait forever. The road to Marrowfield was silent. No birds, no wind, just mud, rot, and ruins. Once, the city had been one of the Empire's last strongholds. Stone walls ringed with black iron towers, known for its libraries, its priest kings, and its alchemists. But that was before the madness, before the sickness. Now it stood like a fossilized corpse, gray towers drooping, streets half swallowed by earth, smoke rising not from chimneys, but from beneath the cobblestones. Sarah and Laura arrived at dusk. No gates, no guards, just a massive archway with an inscription chiseled in 5 languages, all saying the same thing. "We who knew too much forgot our names." Sarah stared at it. Laura clutched her shoulder. "Something's watching," she whispered. Sarah nodded. "It already knows we're here." They entered through a crumbling side street, moving quickly past collapsed homes and twisted statues. Every window was shattered inward, doors torn from hinges. Signs of violence were everywhere, but no bodies. Nothing remained, not even bones, as if the city had eaten its dead. They found shelter in a half-buried chapel. Dust coated everything, but the altar remained strangely untouched. A symbol was etched into the stone, an eye with 3 pupils crowned with thorns. Laura stared at it, then turned away. Sarah lit a fire. The warmth did nothing to calm her nerves. "Your brother came here," she said, "before he vanished. The last place he marked." Laura nodded. "He said something was waking beneath the city. Something sealed long ago." "Sealed with what?" Laura hesitated. Not what. Who? That night, the dreams returned, but they weren't Elric's. They were hers. Sarah stood in a city not yet ruined. Marrowfield gleamed with silver towers and lightless lanterns. The streets were full of chanting, low, rhythmic, otherworldly. A procession marched through the streets. At its front walked a child. She wore robes too large, her eyes black as ink. Her mouth was sewn shut, but she spoke anyway, into Sarah's mind. "You were made for the blade." Sarah reached for her weapon, but it wasn't there. Only the mark burned into her palm, the mark from the altar in the ruin. She woke gasping, hand smoking faintly, a red circle etched into her skin. Laura was gone. The chapel door swung open in the early morning fog. Sarah grabbed her blade and ran. Through twisted streets and collapsed archways she sprinted, calling Laura's name. No answer. Then, in a plaza lined with eyeless statues, she found her, standing motionless. In front of her, him. Not Elric, not truly. The thing that wore his shape turned slowly. Its eyes were wrong, mirrored, silver, reflecting the city and nothing else. It smiled with Elric's mouth. "Sarah," it said softly. "You came." She didn't lower her blade. "You're not him. I'm what he became, what he always was. The hollow path leads here." Laura didn't move. Her face was blank, empty. "What did you do to her?" "She sees what must be done. As you will." The thing stepped forward. The city shifted behind him, walls reshaping, towers twitching like limbs. Marrowfield was not destroyed, it said. It was transformed. It became what the world needs. And what's that? A mouth, to consume what is broken. Sarah struck. Blade fast, clean. It passed through him like smoke. He didn't flinch, just looked sad. "You still think this is a war of blades. You still think we fight." She slashed again. This time the blade caught. Blood spilled. But it wasn't red. It was memory. Visions poured from the wound. Scenes of Elric as a child. Of him killing for the first time. Of his lover dying in his arms. Of every name he whispered before sleep, just to remember who he once was. The thing staggered back, but smiled. "You still carry him," it whispered. "You're already part of us." Sarah grabbed Laura's hand and ran. No one chased, because they didn't need to. Marrowfield was alive now, and it had her scent. They escaped the plaza, barely breathing. Laura didn't speak for hours. They hid in a collapsed bell tower, watching the city shift below. Streets stretching longer than they should. Buildings folding into themselves. Windows blinking open and shut like eyes. Sarah sharpened her blade out of habit. She didn't trust her thoughts anymore. Not after the dream. Not after him. He wore Elric's face too well. But what unsettled her more was that part of her wanted to believe it was Elric. When Laura finally spoke, her voice was dry. "I saw the library." Sarah looked up. "What?" In the dream, Laura said, before he came, before you woke me, I saw a tower, twisted, full of smoke. The books there weren't made of paper. They breathed. Sarah raised a brow. Breathed? Laura nodded. And he was leading me there. Said there was a book without words. The next day, they went looking for it. Navigating Marrowfield was impossible. Streets that led one way the day before now curved into alleys that vanished in fog. Landmarks changed overnight. They tied scraps of cloth to poles, scratched marks in the stone, but none stayed. Only the eye symbol remained, painted on walls, burned into doors, even etched into Sarah's palm. It itched constantly. By nightfall, they reached the tower. It was unlike the others. Where the rest of the city rotted, the library stood pristine. Columns of black stone, a dome of bone-white glass. No door, just a gaping archway, like a throat. Inside, it was cold. The bookshelves ran up and up, higher than should be possible, vanishing into the dark. No ladders, no stairs, just air and silence. Laura stopped in front of one shelf. This one. The book was bound in gray leather. No title, no symbol, just a lock, and no key. Sarah tried to pry it open with her dagger. The blade shattered. The book pulsed. Once, then went still. Laura placed her hand on the cover. It opened instantly. No pages, just black. Endless black. Sarah leaned in, and the world shifted. She stood in a hall of mirrors. Each showed her. Older, younger, blood-soaked, innocent, queen, slave, monster. And one mirror didn't show her at all. Just a blade. The black blade from Veermore. Floating. Waiting. You were never meant to survive, a voice said. Only to choose. She turned. A hooded figure stepped from the shadows. It had no face. Elric chose to carry the hunger. You must choose something worse. What? You must become the reminder. The one who remembers everything the world forgets. She laughed bitterly. I've killed people just to keep breathing. You want me to be a martyr? The figure spread its arms. Number A librarian. The blackness swallowed her again. She gasped awake in the library. Laura clutched the book, eyes wide with knowing. You saw it too, she whispered. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't have to, because when she looked at the book now, she could read it. And it was full of names. Every person the blade had ever killed, including her father, including Laura's brother, including Elric. They're not dead, Sarah whispered. Laura stared. They're trapped. Their souls, bound to the blade, to the hunger. This whole city feeds it. And now, Laura asked. Sarah rose. We find it. Find what? Sarah's voice hardened. The one who made this. The wind howled through the broken streets of Marrowfield. Sarah and Laura moved with purpose now. No longer searching blindly, but following names. The book had revealed more than memory. It had revealed locations. Each name burned like a coal on the pages when they passed certain places, as if the dead were buried not under stone, but under time itself. And every road, every vision pointed down, beneath the city, where the foundation pulsed with something far older than stone. They reached a spiral staircase near the heart of the old temple district, once the domain of Marrowfield's priest-kings. Now nothing remained but dust and twisted columns bearing carvings of the eye. At the center of the temple, under a collapsed dais, they found it. A spiral stair descending into absolute darkness. Laura stared down it with pale dread. No one builds stairs like these, she whispered. Sarah raised her torch. Someone did. The descent took hours. The deeper they went, the less the flame obeyed natural laws. Shadows stretched the wrong way. Heat faded. Sound began to echo before they made it, and the walls changed. First smooth stone, then bone, then teeth, as if the stairwell had passed into the throat of a buried titan. Laura stopped suddenly. "We're not in the city anymore," Sarah nodded. "We're in it." They reached the bottom and found a hall, a place that should not exist. The ceiling rose impossibly high, and the walls were etched with language neither could read, symbols that shimmered like oil in the torchlight. At the far end stood a throne of black iron and sinew, and on it sat Number. Not a person, a shape. It had limbs, a face, even robes, but nothing about it said alive. It stared at them without eyes, and spoke without moving. "Daughter of silence," it said. Sarah flinched. "Do you know what you carry?" "The blade," she said, voice sharp. "The book." The name's the figure's mouth opened, wider than a jaw should. "You carry the wound, the hole in the world that never closed. You carry regret." Sarah stepped closer, blade drawn. "What are you?" "I am the first mistake." The throne twitched. The ground trembled. Sarah stood her ground. "You made the blade. Number 1 found it, buried beneath memory, waiting for someone like you. I'm nothing like you. You are exactly like me." Laura stepped forward now, her voice shaking. "You're the architect. Elric said your name before he vanished." The thing nodded slowly. "Elric opened the door. You must close it." The floor cracked. Darkness spilled up like smoke. All around them, the names in the book began to glow. Sarah felt them, each life, like daggers in her chest. Painful, familiar. "Why me?" she asked. "Why not Elric?" The figure on the throne leaned forward. "Because you never wanted it. Because you still dream of mercy. And because you still bleed when you kill." Sarah gritted her teeth. "And if I choose to walk away?" The throne began to dissolve, like ash in the wind. "Then the blade will choose again. And next time, it won't choose someone who dreams." The figure vanished. Behind the throne, a door opened. Beyond it, the chamber of the blade. They stepped forward together, and the book closed behind them. The door shut behind them without sound. Before Sarah and Laura stretched a vast circular chamber, unlike anything they had seen above. The walls were veins of obsidian, pulsing faintly with red light. At the center, upon a platform of stone and bone, hovered the blade, not resting, suspended, like a heartbeat held between beats. Black steel, serrated along one side, its hilt wrapped in dark silk, weathered with age. The sword seemed to drink the light, casting no reflection. The chamber thrummed with whispers, names, memories, regrets, all clawing toward Sarah like hungry moths. Laura took a step forward, her breath shaky. "It's beautiful. And wrong." Sarah didn't respond. She was already walking toward it, drawn by something she didn't understand. Not a voice, not a command, just recognition. The blade was hers. It had always been hers, long before the order, long before her name was hers to keep. The moment her hand touched the hilt, everything stopped. No wind, no sound, not even time. She stood now in a place outside memory, a void of starlight and bone. Before her, the same blade, planted in the ground. Beside it, a figure in a cloak of feathers, back turned. "You should not have come here," the figure said. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of Elric." Sarah's breath caught. "You're alive?" He turned. The face was half his, young, tired, scarred. The other half was made of smoke. Alive is not the word. Not anymore. You came for answers, but all this blade ever gives is choice. Sarah looked down at it, bloodless, silent, yet heavy enough to crush a mountain with the weight of its history. It doesn't just kill, Elric said. It remembers. Every name, every death, every lie we told ourselves. You think it made you an assassin. Number It made you a witness. She gripped it harder. Then why give it to me? He stepped closer. Because you still flinch. Suddenly, visions. The girl in the rain. Her first kill. The priest begging for mercy, hands lifted, eyes wide. The noble's child, sleeping, never knowing the blade's touch would be his last. Each death, each regret. And then Laura, standing in the chamber calling her name. Sarah, Sarah, let go. You're not breathing. She gasped, collapsing to her knees, hand smoking from contact. Laura pulled her back. You were gone, just standing there for minutes. Sarah looked up at the blade. It's not a weapon. It's a decision. Laura frowned. Then what do we do? Sarah stood slowly, eyes firm now. We end it. She raised the book in one hand, the blade in the other. The chamber responded, the floor cracking, the air filling with voices, the weight of 1,000 lives pressing in from every wall. She spoke into the dark. I carry your names. I carry your pain, but I will not carry your curse. She drove the blade into the book. There was no explosion, no scream, just silence. Then, release. The whispers stopped. The red light faded. The chamber grew still, and the blade vanished. In its place, only a stone tablet remained. On it, carved freshly, remember us, but do not become us. Sarah fell to her knees. Laura embraced her, tears finally falling. It was over, but something in Sarah knew. Peace wasn't the end. It was just the moment when you choose not to carry the war with you. They climbed for what felt like days. The spiral stairs that once sank into the depths now twisted back toward the surface, crumbling as they walked. With each step, Sarah felt lighter, less burdened. Not healed, no, but no longer drowning. Behind them, the chamber of the blade had collapsed. Nothing remained but dust and silence. And still, the book was gone. The sword, gone. Only memory remained, and it weighed enough. When they emerged into the city, dawn was breaking. But something was wrong. Marrowfield was still. Not quiet in the way cities sleep, but lifeless, as if everything had simply stopped. No wind, no footsteps, no birds. Sarah walked the broken streets with Laura behind her, watching for signs of life. The houses were empty. Fires still burned in hearths, but no one tended them. Food rotted half-eaten. Dogs lay unmoving. Candles burned down to wax. Time had not frozen. People had. Laura found the first one in the marketplace. A man kneeling, hands clasped as if in prayer, eyes closed, still breathing, but unresponsive. Dozens more like him, some standing, some mid-step. Sarah crouched near one. Trapped, she whispered. Laura knelt beside her. By what? Not what, Sarah said slowly. Who? She looked around. The eye symbols were still there, but faint now, flickering like ink in rain. This city wasn't dying, she realized. It was being held. Held in memory, held in pain, held in regret. The blade hadn't just fed on death. It fed on the echo after death, on grief, on silence, on guilt. And now that the blade was gone, so was the power holding the city together. They found the architect again, but not as before. Now he was human, old, frail, eyes clouded, hands trembling. He sat beneath the old temple's arch, staring into the empty sky. You returned, he said, as if he'd been expecting them. Sarah said nothing. He looked up at her, voice brittle. You ended it. I chose, she answered. Isn't that what you wanted? The old man laughed, hoarse and broken. No one's ever chosen to let it go. Not in all the centuries. They all take it. Every time. She stared. You mean there were others? Dozens, he whispered, and I watched every one of them fall. She knelt before him. What happens now? He smiled sadly. I don't know. Then he closed his eyes and died. Not violently, just peacefully, as if he'd been waiting centuries for this one moment of permission to rest. By nightfall, the city began to move again. Slowly, one person at a time. A child crying, a woman shouting a name, someone running, someone laughing. The fog that haunted the streets dissolved. The buildings no longer shifted. The streets aligned again. The eye symbols flaked from the walls like dead paint. They burned the architect's body in the square. No crowd gathered. Just a few souls who remembered enough to know it mattered. Laura placed a black stone beside the pyre. The only remnant of the book. Sarah said nothing. She was watching the sky. For the first time in years, there were stars. Laura turned to her. Will you stay? Sarah shook her head. This city needs healers, not killers. You're not a killer anymore. Sarah looked down at her scarred hands. I always will be. But maybe that's the point. She began walking. Where will you go? Laura called after her. Sarah smiled without turning back. To remember the ones who never got the chance. She left Marrowfield at sunrise. No one stopped her. No banners waved. No songs marked her passing. Just boots on dirt. Wind in trees. The quiet echo of someone walking away from everything they once were. Sarah walked north. Away from the city. From Laura. From the ghosts. With no sword. No orders. No master. But the names stayed with her. Always would. The land changed. Forests gave way to hills. Hills to cold plains. She passed abandoned monasteries, long-forgotten towers, broken statues of kings no one remembered. Sometimes she saw people. A merchant with a limp, smiling through missing teeth. A hunter offering food by a fire. A little girl singing to herself beside a river, braiding grass into crowns. They asked no questions. She offered no name, just a nod, a glance, a hand when needed, and silence. In a village built from old shipwrecks, a fever broke out. Sarah stayed. She boiled herbs, cleaned wounds, carried buckets. No one asked why a woman with assassin's eyes knew so much about pain. They just watched how steady her hands were when a child couldn't breathe. They began calling her Ashra, the gray one. Not because of her cloak, but because she never said black or white. Never blamed, never praised, just listened, and stayed until the dying stopped. Years passed. She changed. Her hair grayed early. Her voice softened. The scar on her wrist faded, though she touched it some nights out of habit. Not regret, just remembrance. She kept a small book, blank pages, no names, just moments. A mother laughing despite tears, the sound of snow on wooden roofs, a boy's voice saying, "Don't go yet." She never signed it, but once, on the back page, she wrote, "Not every silence is a curse." One winter, the dreams returned, of the blade, of the book, of the names she couldn't save. But they were different now, no longer screams or blood, just faces, smiling, forgiving, watching. And one night, she saw Laura. In the dream, the girl was older, hair in a braid, standing by a rebuilt gate in Marrowfield, watching children run through clean streets. She turned to Sarah. We kept the stars lit. Sarah died in a spring storm, quietly, in her sleep. No blades, no poisons, no regrets. They buried her beneath a willow tree near the edge of the village. No headstone, just a circle of smooth black stones, and a single line carved into the wood above. She carried what others couldn't. and she let it go. Some say she was a healer, others, a warrior. The oldest remember a woman who never lied, but never told the truth either. All agreed on one thing. She listened. And sometimes when storms pass and the wind moves just right through the grass, you can still hear the names, not screamed, but whispered, like ash, like memory, like mercy.